One of the more interesting aspects of reality, thought, paradigms is the paradigm of paradox. And I'd suggest that it's one of the most misunderstood and most important aspects to understand. And I want to talk about it in a brainstorming way. Like so many things, we don't get a single hour of this in high school, most of us not in college. Heaven help us if we get something like this from our parents or culture. In fact, everything that is most important to understand as human beings is very actively denied, suppressed, diverted, and ignored by every one of the institutional power structures around us as we emerge into this world. Because the power structures that we're dealing with, be they the high facilitator power structure, the United States government power structure, the power structure of our own ego, the power structure of the patriarchy, the power structure of banks, the power structure of capitalism, the power structures of communism. It doesn't matter what the area is. The power structures and the norms of our cultures do not support the well-being of large sections of the psyche, be that large sections of the human species, large sections of the planet, large sections of the country, large sections of the persona within each of us as individuals. And the reference points, therefore, are not to societal norms. And in our very limited grasp of cultural history, which is primarily an expedition of the dominance of the patriarchy, whether you look at the religious power structures and that are going on today or went on in the last decade or went on in the last 100 years or the last 1,000 years, you find this very interesting dynamic of incomplete asymmetrical power structures being formed that concentrate power and then use it in general to concentrate more power, not to bring the most well-being to the people they were empowered to serve. This particular pattern is a pattern that permeates our Western culture, which itself is based on the asymmetry of chauvinism, the overvaluing of masculine energy and the undervaluing of feminine energy. And the fact that you probably don't know what that means is not a reflection of your lack of intelligence or potential intelligence. It is a reflection of the fact that we don't get a single hour learning what feminine energy is, other than to denigrate it. We don't get a single hour of learning what healthy masculine energy is, other than to stereotype it. So the fact that you do not know what I'm brainstorming, and the fact that I do not know a third as much as I would like to know, is a direct indictment of an education system that fails to understand the essence of education, educare, to bring out the gifts, the strengths, the talents, and the truths that are within, not to cram the societal nonsense of the present day, or more accurately, several centuries ago. I mean, when have you used algebra? When have you used geometry? It's very bizarre how much intensity goes into drumming largely irrelevant facts into the conscious mind, communicating all the time the message: your feelings don't matter, these facts matter, and even these facts don't matter, but looking good and passing on this test matters. And the test is not all that important, except that will determine how much we pay you in this factory, regimented protocol of it's all about how much money you make in a capitalistic paradigm. It's all for something else other than you. This is for this, this is for this, this is for this, this is for this, this is so that you can do this for so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and none of it is for you. The oceans, the land, the trees, the entirety of the human psyche, the entirety of the human possibility field is for you. Is for you. And we learn about 1% of what's available to us. So paradox and the paradigm of paradox is just one of our many ignorances. So I'm mostly as ignorant as the rest of you and the rest of me, etc., but I'll share what I know, and then we can start exploring from there. I've always learned by talking because I see geometric shapes when I talk. And if I see a bunch of geometric shapes all converging on a given dot in the matrix of consciousness referenced by language, I start talking some more about that. And if I see a line going out that way that's coming in and intersecting with this line here, I can follow the lines back and see where they go. So I point this out in the beginning of my books because I've learned that in a psychologically illiterate culture, this has never occurred to a single human being that I've talked to. There are so many things that are basic that I have not met a single human being in Western culture that it even occurs to them that it might be happening. Meaning they're basic, and there's an absence of humility to understand that it even might be happening, such that there would be a question. See, because if you have humility, you can say, is it going like this or like this? Are you doing this for this reason, or are you doing it for this reason? When you have no humility, it is absolutely certain that your projections are correct, even if they're wrong, so that you don't discover that they're wrong because you don't ask, because you were certain that they were correct. You took projection for reality with so much certainty that there was no other option. And I've lived in this world as someone with Asperger's, as someone who has a variety of specialized experiences and traits that have nothing to do, that in many cases are 180 degrees with the societal norms. Now, what our culture does with anything that doesn't fit into its box is it pathologizes it. And this is one of the paradoxes. So here's our first chance to deal with paradox. For example, I may say that I have Asperger's syndrome because there's some good corollary data between Asperger's syndrome and a number of my predispositions. Now, here's the first paradox. Is Asperger's syndrome a gift? Yes. Is it a limitation? Yes. Is it a problem in this cult? Yes. Is this cult a problem for Asperger's? Yes. Is this cult a problem for me? Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Now, when you're dealing with paradox, one of the goals is to be able to say yes to seemingly contradictory truths. Now, if we were to draw two path lines in thought, and I hope we're following along here, one path line is an either-or paradigm. Now, what either-or mean is that if 2 plus 2 equals 4, then it does not equal 5, because 5 is different than 4, and there can only be one correct answer. So, does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Yes. Does 2 plus 2 equal 5? No. This is either-or thinking. Now, the problem comes with a very limited processing capacity. We like to apply what we know on what we don't know because it's so much easier. It's the hammer that finds everything to be a nail, because a hammer is useful at pounding nails, and I've got one. And the hammer is not useful at painting Easter eggs. In fact, the hammer is a disaster. But I've got a hammer. So one of the big pushes in thought and in consciousness, in a culture that is terrified of the unknown because of the uncertainty it brings, and uncertainty is terrifying because it could take us back into unresolved trauma. And unresolved trauma is terrifying because it's overwhelming and we don't know how to deal with it in a trauma-illiterate culture. So the unknown has got to be shut down at all costs. So if we're a hammer and we need to paint Easter eggs, we could start experimenting and making paintbrushes and looking for paints and all that. But maybe we'll fail. Maybe it won't work out. And so what we do is we say, I know, we're not going to paint Easter eggs, we're going to break eggs. See, this is how you break eggs, everyone. Bang these eggs. See, you break it like this, and you break it like this. And then you go to another situation, and, your girlfriend needs a massage. But I'm a hammer. And it doesn't feel good. And we don't say, well, that's because I've only got a hammer and I don't know what I'm doing. We say, here's a problem. You don't need a massage. What you need is some very rapid vibrations. And this hammer is just the right thing to do some very rapid vibrations. Like this, you feel a bit shocked? That's exactly the kind of shock you should be feeling. This shock will integrate, and in 3 days, come and see me again, and you can pay me some money. Or, and we just reinvent all kinds of things. Scientists get all excited about science being very good at measuring relatively stable, crude phenomena, like how much concrete does it take before an earthquake of this magnitude will do this and that and the other. It's wonderful for things like that. And then there are things like feelings that don't fit into it. There's things like human consciousness that don't fit into it. There's things like dreams of the future that don't fit into it. There's things like this. And so I know we'll just say it doesn't exist. Anyone who talks about an unknown flying phenomena, of which there seem to be a great deal, is a quack. Great. Now we've solved it, So we've hung on to our little hammer. And no matter what anyone says, We'll just retwist around reality until either the hammer is the best thing for it, or it doesn't exist, or it's not important, or you're just a troublemaker and unmodern and all this stuff. And we just attack anything that might threaten our little hammer of the unknown. Now, this is the biggest problem with a trauma-illiterate culture, because 99.9% of all that is unknown, and even more of it is unknown. Meaning we don't even know that we don't know it. Let's go back to Mr. Rumsfeld. There's the things we know. There's the things we don't know. There's the things we know we don't know. And then there are the things we don't know we don't know. And I don't know why he got so much flack for that. It's absolutely correct. It's probably because he was changing the subject and refusing to answer the question. But the things that we don't know are by far the biggest portion of reality out there. And the way that we can start exploring the things we don't know is, first of all, to map out and discover that we don't know them. Now, this is not fun if the last time we were out of control, if the last time we were out of our depth, if the last time we needed to ask for help, if the last time we were completely innocent and naive in the paradigm, we were, told we were humiliated, we were abandoned, we were hurt, we didn't get the help. This is why the high facilitator treatment, in response to me saying, I don't know what's going on, I need help, I need to be heard, and I need to be listened to now. You see, the high facilitators consulted with their attorney. The high facilitators feverishly called everyone but me. What should we do about this? What should we do about this? Oh, if this doesn't look good for high. Oh my goodness. What should we do? Everything but respond to the only person relevant, the only person with the information. You think Peter Sandhill, who's in massive denial about his own shadow, who is not honest, who forgets things that are recorded, you think he's the person to talk to about his own sexual abuse pattern over a 12-year period? Oh yeah, we got to talk to Peter. What's going on? What's going on? Not to the abuse survivor. You see, so this creates. Do you think I'm looking forward to the next time that I'm in complete helplessness and trauma and need absolute help, and I'm going to have to rely on human beings? Well, let's see. Well, what's the history? It's like mom and dad when I was caught in a dryer, mom and dad when I was abandoned by them in the forest, mom and dad when I was beaten and they told me it was for my own good, mom and dad when I was this. It's like, I want nothing to do with these assholes. I want nothing to do with these idiots called human beings that think they know how to raise a human consciousness to be halfway intelligent. I want nothing to do with therapists and because there is nothing more horrible than to be in complete desperation, in the unknown, in trauma, overwhelmed, unable to know what the boundaries are or understand what's going on, and realize that who you are and what you need comes way down the line, past defense. Defense patterns are more important than you are. Blind spots are more important than you. We cannot see this at all costs. No one else can see it all. Okay, if we can manage to help this guy without looking at our blind spots, without confronting the abuser, without damaging our money, without taking any time, if we can manage to give him a hand here and there between all those agendas, let's do it, because we don't want to hurt this person. That's getting awfully close to our blind spot. We can't help him there. We can't bring in any help that people might find out. We can't do this. Well, let's help him a bit here. We'll go out on a limb here. This man is dangerous to you. Okay, so you're going to stop recommending him to people. Oh, no, we can't. That violates the agenda. Violates the agenda. Now, when you are in this experience, and you've had this happen a few times to you by human beings, absolute horror, timeless helplessness, rage, despair, and you've been surrounded by a circle of cowards who either don't know, in most cases don't know they don't know, certainly don't want to learn that they don't know. It is a nightmare. And so we have vowed, in a very dangerous vow as a species, never to go into these unknowns and these helplessnesses again. I will never be at the mercy of another fucked up human being again. Never. I will never let a man hurt me like this. I will never da-da-da-da-da. The problem with this is this means you can never go into the unknown, you see. I will never, let someone treat me like that again. You can't go into the unknown. Because in the unknown, some fucked up, idiotic, self-absorbed, sociopathic human being may do exactly that. And no, you didn't see it coming because it was unknown. See, this is why it is so what we do when we raise a traumatized generation, which we are, if you don't think you're a traumatized generation, take the time to question your own psychological illiteracy by read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, read Alice Miller, read, what's his name in Canada, the Gabor Mate and his, The Hungry Ghosts, or, something along those lines. Just three books. I mean, you've got the entire infinity of the human psyche locked up within you with all kinds of padlocks. 3 books might give you a crack of light. Might. In the density of the cloaking devices all around who you are. Is it worth it? Are you worth it? Nah. Why bother, right? Because you already know what you don't know that you don't know, right? And so, if you will do that, and if you will start exploring the vast multiverse inside each one of us, the vast fields of possibility, boundless grace, exquisite wordless beauty, love without end. These domains also exist alongside the boundless horror, the timeless loneliness, the helplessness that breaks the spirit, the murder of our soul, the freezing of our feminine self into a sociopathic numbness. These parts all exist in the possibility and probability field of the psyche. And when you rein in the hatred to a tolerable level, and say, I just can't feel hatred beyond about 3 on my 1 to 10 scale. My 1 to 10 scale, I would add, not the 1 to 10 scale, my 1 to 10 scale. I can't feel hate on my 1 to 10 scale. But you think you can feel the boundless epiphany of spontaneous joy at a 10 out of 10, while carefully guarding that hate doesn't go over a 3. You see, these control mechanisms, governors, very healthy for survival in a sociopathic environment, are the very things imprisoning the vast amount of our probability field that is bursting at the seams to expand beyond the governors that are only necessary and appropriate in a trauma-illiterate and sociopathic culture. We may have elements of Phuket typhoons, so stand by. these limits, oh, we don't have enough time. The limit of 50 minutes on a therapy session. Now, sure, there are Zen masters that can put 10 years of therapy into 50 minutes, but they don't need therapy, you see. The people that need therapy the most do not know how to condense time such that 10 years of emotion could occur in 50 minutes. And most of them, if they get onto flows that take them into uncontrollable terrain, do not want to have that flow chopped off and be evicted at the 50-minute mark, which means they don't go into the flows in therapy that are necessary. They just say, this is a sociopathic therapy. From a sociopathic therapist, the fixed points have nothing to do with me. You will come and go on my schedule. You will pay this amount. You will drive to my location. And I will sit here and say, the rest is up to you. Don't do anything with the time. It's your time. No, it isn't. If it's my time, why don't we meet by the river for 5 or 6 hours and you pay me to learn about the psyche through my wound that happens to be a mirror of you. How about that? Nah, I don't want to do that. It's all about you. It's all your session. And so we have these many tensions, basically. If we look at a bicycle wheel, now science, for all of its shortcomings, is actually more accurate than a culture, meaning every area that we're having problems is the cultural overlay upon science. It's not scientific to say that a human being is 30% mind, 30% emotion, 30% body, based on every single human being's experience. I mean, has there ever been a human being that says, I've never had a thought and my thoughts are completely unimportant, including that thought, the thought that I'm unimportant, and the thought that thoughts are unimportant, that thought is also unimportant and has absolutely no bearing on my life or experience or what I do on a daily basis? Of course not. But science can come along and pretend through the cultural bias, that we not look at consciousness, and through scientists' own terror of their own trauma. Because one of the big draws to science in a sociopathic era in which every one of us has trauma, and most of it is unresolved and misunderstood, is the escape from trauma through science. If we can say that consciousness doesn't exist, then all my pain doesn't exist, because my pain is conscious. Isn't that wonderful? And then neuroscience starts ruining it, right? Because we start seeing deterioration in the neuronal pathways, and it's like, okay, I guess that pain does exist. And it's like, childhood abuse doesn't have any impact in adulthood. They just grow up, children are resilient, and then you have the Felitti study, where, oh gosh, the ACE score does correspond alarmingly. 5,000% increase in suicide if you've got a score 4 or more. Oh, that doesn't sound good. Maybe it does have impact, but let's not study it scientifically, And so we have we have these paradigms, and then we have these terrors in emotional ignorances and illiteracy from a terrifying, traumatizing, and emotionally illiterate culture that keep us locked in these little boxes where we can't afford to see the horror that's going on because it's overwhelming. We don't know what to do about it in an emotionally illiterate culture, so we stay emotionally illiterate by not seeing what's going on. Now, you're a brave son of a bitch to be here watching this video if you're here. And how many? Is it 1% that would find this interesting rather than terrifying, rather than, oh, I've got Seinfeld reruns to watch, I've got new shoes to buy, and then there's this, and I'm an important adult now, so I've got to go and wash my car and do this and that and the other, and all these very important things, so that I can go do my very important job of moving bits of paper and doing this, and I'm an important member of this culture. remember paradox. Remember paradox. That, what limits pain limits love. Well, anyway, back to the either or thinking. If 2 plus 2 equals 4, it does not equal 5. 5 is different from 4. Anyway, you got the logic. Now, in the other train of thought, you introduce relativity. And when you introduce relativity, you introduce and this, and you start entering paradox. Now, relativity is important because if you hadn't noticed, you don't agree with everything that I say. Even if you do, you don't say it the same way I say it. And if you're from someone of a different language, you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Because it's relative to who? To you. You are the relative variable. You are the relative variable. Your experiences, your thoughts, your body sensation, your beliefs, your gender, your culture, your time in history, your age, your stereotypes about your age, your religion, your cultural overlays, your value hierarchy, your love language, every single one of these things is relative to you. Now, this is a more interesting arena. So we have the either-or arena, which is good for math. I mean, you don't really want to go to the cash register and discover that $4.99 in the eyes of the cash register really means $6,890, and so that's what they're going to charge your credit card and pocket the difference. You don't really want to deal with that in a cash register. On the other hand, that's just money. That's just little math transactions. That is not the infinity of the psyche, of the circle, of the probability and possibility field of human consciousness. This is just little bits that make, let's all, for the sake of agreement and smoothness, agree that these little signs actually mean this, and that they translate to this, and translate to this, and that $1 is 0.86 euros, and let's just agree on these things, and let's agree that if it's this, it's not this, because it cuts down on chaos in a way that moves things along, that doesn't create shock and new trauma. And, okay, so that's fine. We have our little pockets of areas that are either or. But most of human consciousness is in a domain that it is this and this. It's this for this person, and it's this for this person, and it's this for this person. What I'm talking about in terms of the facilitator negligence cycle is a 10 on my priority list. It's probably a 2, 3, 5. Typical American, another fuck up over there, another idiot doesn't know that. It's not my problem, It's not a big deal. Does that mean it is a big deal and you're wrong? Does that mean it isn't a big deal and I'm wrong? See, this is where paradox and both and thinking need to come into play. Now, we learn materialism in a materialistic culture, and we've agreed that either or thinking is generally what we want to rely on for mathematics and money. The core god of our culture is money. It's actually quite remarkable. If you look at and this is the positive aspect of prostitution, you know, if you look at the deity as money, and you look at how much money it takes for someone to betray their girlfriend, betray their boyfriend, betray their child, sell their child, you know, sell their child into prostitution, do this, that, and the other, it's illuminating the relative value of this deity called money, which is a metaphor in our capitalistic paradigm for everything good. Everything good comes out of money, and so for enough money, you should be willing to sell your soul, murder your daughter, you know, whatever it is, and say, well, you know, if I murder my daughter for $3 million and then I give a few $100s to an orphanage and save 3 girls, well, the world's a better place, and you know, and you have this rationist, reductionist thinking that destroys the soul. It destroys the soul but of course the soul is invisible in our culture, so it doesn't destroy anything because it doesn't exist. Where's the evidence? Show me the soul in a test tube. Well, rather than challenging me to fit the many things that don't fit into test tubes, why don't you challenge yourselves to create a paradigm big enough to hold the many things that do not fit into test tubes? Rather than dismissing as unreal the 99% of reality that you don't even know that you don't know, because it doesn't fit into your little box, why don't you fucking expand your box and admit how inadequate your box is to hold 99.9% of what doesn't fit into your box, because your box is not big enough. And whose responsibility is that? Should 99% of all that is disappear because it doesn't fit into your little box? Or should you just say, I have a little box, is the best box I can make. 99.9% of all reality doesn't fit into it. This is the best I can do, and I'll work on growing it. And if I'm really lucky, by the end of the lifetime, only 98% won't fit into it. And an entire extra percent of the probability field of reality will fit into my box. And amazingly, a little monkey brain that can barely remember 20 digits will have a bigger sense of reality. And who said it should be any different? So we have with relativity comes both and. But the other thing is open and closed systems. You see, when 2 + 2 = 4 assumes that the only units are coming from the 2 + 2. What if 2 + 2, let's say I take these 2 fingers, and then these 2 fingers, so we got 2 + 2 = 4. But what if an angel comes along and sticks another finger there? Not this finger, an angel's finger. Is there 5 fingers? You know, so now 2 + 2 with the help of an angel equals 5. Now this is very, that's just the first idea that popped into my head. The point is, whether it's a finger of an ape, a finger of my dog, a plastic finger, the point is, when you bring in relativity, number one, that you see things different than me. Number two, when you bring in the humility to the dimensions that exist that we are not incorporating into our paradigms. And number three, when you bring in conscious agency of places other than humans, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but there's this interesting phenomena that Cartesian logic is viewed as kind of the cornerstone of Western science in many ways. And here's how René Descartes got his system of Cartesian logic. He was coming along, a soldier in a war, returning from attacking some alchemists, and an angel visits him in a vision and says the world will be conquered by measurements and numbers. And he says, well, it's an angel. I've got to pay attention. You see, in those days, angels could exist because we weren't fools for assuming that everything didn't fit into a test tube. So anyway, angel shows up, gives a soldier coming back from war, not very moralistic, it's not a very appropriate story, is it? You know, some soldier coming back from war gets visited by an angel. I mean, why does René get the vision? Why not a priest in a Zen temple or something? You know, but anyway, but this is our logic, right? Soldiers, well, mercenaries. You know, he was just soldiering for money. You know, not very. You know, but these are our limitations. How outrageous! Well, it's even more outrageous to the scientists who don't want to credit an angel for the birth of their materialism that denies all angels. I mean, it's kind of odd, isn't it? You know, because you have those Star Trek episodes where you shouldn't go back into time and change it because then you might not exist, right? And of course, who would seriously take Star Trek seriously? Only many of the great visionaries of today, including X-Prize founder Diamandis, who bases a lot of the inspiration that's led to Singularity University producing a number of phenomenal things in our culture from Star Trek. Anyway, so we have, should you go to school or should you study Star Trek? Or does it have to be either or? Is it one or the other? What's the paradox? If you could go back in time and all these materialist scientists could kill the angel, delete the angel from history so that she wouldn't ruin the materialist paradigm, and then Descartes wouldn't get the vision, and then all the scientists wouldn't exist. You see? So would they do it? Would they kill the angel if they could go back in time, so as not to ruin their theories based on the angel's advice? And so you have these, the reality is much bigger. So one of the paradoxes in this dynamic, if the Human Awareness Institute had not taught me how to communicate as clearly as I do, could I be prosecuting them in a moral court based on my passion that no sexual abuse survivor will go through this crap again by the high facilitators? Well, if I succeed in silencing the high facilitators because they refuse to upgrade their ethics to meet typical societal trauma standards. I mean, there really is not anyone other than the high facilitators that pretend that a high facilitator sexually abusing a high participant recommended and trained is not a high issue, but it is every facilitator's position. Is their position as a result of meeting behind closed doors, saying so, and then refusing to unsay it. Well, that's how you create a position. This is the way it is. May not be what they believe. I would hope not. But this is their protocol, that the next time a sexual abuse comes to them in terror and helplessness and all that, and says, please help me, they're going to say, no, it's not a high issue, even though we know it is. Because, and here's the fuzzy logic, right? Oh, because of high, we can't let high be tarnished. Well, what's high? Just a group of people that organize around trying to help people. Well, if you're not helping people, shouldn't that be known? No. We've got to protect the reputation, not the people, but the reputation. Well, when did the reputation about helping people become more important than helping people? We're doing this for high. Shut up. Don't talk to us about this stuff. We're dedicated to high. And you have this paradox where their dedication to their organizational power structure is legally, ethically, financially exposing their power structure by the very behavior that is unethical and illegal. So does it, so you get into these paradoxes. In another paradox, we as a culture don't like looking at ecological thought. We don't like seeing the fact that the line between you and me is not quite as impervious as we pretend through the lens of ego consciousness. This is relativity again. Through the lens of socially attuned mental ego consciousness, it seems that I have complete independence over my own body, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is I get physically sick every time the high facilitators do something that re-triggers and emphasizes trauma. So we have this paradigm where, you're at choice and you're at choice. Like, I can hit you over the head with a baseball bat or shoot you with a gun. That's my choice. And that you're at choice about whether to die or not. No, I'm not at choice. Don't be silly. I'm hit by a bullet. Of course I can't live. But you are at choice about emotional bullets. See, I can take your deepest traumatic patterns and hit you over the head with that, but then you're at choice to just feel happy, because you could have just felt happy. You could have just said, this is love, this is wonderful. No, you can't do that with a bullet, don't be silly, but you can do that with feelings. Someone can tell you it's all your fault, this and that and the other, and you can just feel wonderful. And the reality is there's a density factor, and trauma is one of those things that is bigger than the ego, because what dies is not consciousness and life. What dies is ego consciousness. When the bullet hits, what dies? Ego consciousness dies. The body transforms into life. If it's ash, it becomes fertilizer. If it's blood and stuff, worms and stuff, and it becomes life. The body returns to its ecology. And there's nothing to say that the consciousness does not return to the soul, that the spirit does not lift into a wider energy field of the human energy constellation. But the body becomes part of the natural constellation, the natural ecology. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't vanish. It just takes a different form. The only thing that dies, the most fragile thing on the planet, is ego consciousness. That this is me separate from you. That dies because I'm no longer separate. I'm now feeding roses. I'm now in the clouds. I'm now water. I'm now, being eaten by animals. There's nothing that dies except the sense of the separate me, which is the most miserable part of my entire existence. The part that feels completely alone and separate, betrayed, abandoned, unseen in this area, not seen in this area, that dies. It's turned into a remembering. Oh, we're all together here. Oh, this was a simulation. Oh, this was a construct of such and such and such and such. Oh, we were never apart. I breathed my own air. I felt my own vibrations through the lens of my heart, an organ that registers a certain frequency of vibration in different convergent and discordant patterns. Oh, I had thoughts created by the observing and measuring device of a consciousness conscious of itself. Of what self? Well, of itself. Well, how can it be conscious of it if there's only one? Well, who else is there? Do I start spending time with him now? And is it still a he? And so we have a paradox in which you have the greatest horror of death being snuffing out a human life, and the greatest celebration being freedom from the myopia of the ego's fantasy of separation. That in an either-or reality you might say, well, it couldn't exist because you're really connected to the whole, so the ego doesn't exist. And the scientific either-or paradigm, well, if the brains just did this and this and this, that means your consciousness doesn't exist. But in the both and paradigm, it is both the greatest horror and the greatest liberation. It is both the death and it is the birth. It is both the freedom and the control. Someone did not want you to say what you had to say, so they killed you emotionally, mentally, physically. They killed you. And they set you free to feel and permeate the field with that truth. That was not welcome here, but now it's welcome everywhere. And so we have paradox. Now, as I work with paradox, so here's a couple of tools. First of all, one, The Third Alternative by Stephen Covey is, I think it's his last book, but whether it is or not, it's the best technology for tracking win-win that I have stumbled across. There isn't a ton of it because in a competitive capitalistic paradigm, there's not as much focus on partnering, which is why my most recent published book is The Art of Partnering. And it's obviously, again, back to relative, that we're different. I gave that book to Peter Sandhill to teach him how to partner when he wasn't partnering. And he read it, said he got it, and didn't do any partner initiating or do a single exercise with me from the book or ask a single partnering question. Well, but he got it. What did he get? He got his own version of the book, apparently, which was not my intention. But this is this can bring into a paradox in a moment where you can say, okay, I got this. Was that what you wanted me to get? This was my book that I read and learned X and X and X. What did you intend? This is a good book to expand because part of paradox and part of going beyond either and thinking. Now, they're not entirely the same. This is good for me, this is good for you, they seem to be at odds. You bring in a third alternative. What's the reason why you want this? Why would this be a win for you? And this is why this would be a win for me. So for example, with the Human Awareness Institute, you take, their dogged devotion to the Human Awareness Institute, expressed by traumatizing and covering up abuse to one of their participants. It's got to be covered up at all costs to preserve the Human Awareness Institute. But if you understand, okay, the reason is for what's the Human Awareness Institute, and you do a little bit of exercise, and you say, well, what would happen? Like, what would a high look like? What would an organization look like where everyone won out of this situation? And how could that occur? And can you just do that on weekends, or might you have to really focus the organization on a win-win paradigm with a win-win protocol? The protocol is, for example, I want my finger to go up. I want my finger to go up. That's not a good protocol, is it? So the protocol has to be integrated with the paradigm and integrated with the intention. And how do you learn that? Well, you practice. The consciousness has figured out, in neural feedback, what we learn is that as soon as you attract electrodes of any kind to some area of the body or the brain, that if you think or sweat or do this or that, the other, the dial moves to the left or the right, your consciousness can figure out what bits within the body turn the dial on the computer to right and left, and it will then, you'll get good at changing that variable. It's quite remarkable. This is, one area that we really need to, we're of course illiterate. I use that word because we haven't even bothered to invent words about the absence of knowledge about neural feedback or physiological phenomena, because these are woo-woo feminine things that a scientific culture couldn't possibly learn about its own body. It's very bizarre logic. But either way, the DARPA U.S. Defense Fund is currently looking at very interesting ways to get little discs to fly up 30 feet with high-powered laser that's using so much electricity that it's going to wipe out the savings of all your little improvements with LED bulbs you're so proud of, because your tax money is going to spend massive bursts of incredible energy, because who knows, in another 50 years we might really need to shoot metal discs up in the air with lasers, because we couldn't possibly fly a $49 drone up there. And so this is where our research is going, into very important areas of flying metal discs. So go figure. This is the Western mind at the peak of its great superiority over all other forms of consciousness it stamps out before understanding. Now, a good healthy place to reach is enough awareness of the relative values to understand how just about everything is the very best thing and the very worst thing for something, number one. This is a good introduction to paradoxical thinking. So if you're thinking, oh, this guy's full of shit, I want to kill him. Okay, relative to X value and X value and X value, this is shitty. using this metric and this metric and this metric. And killing would be indeed a great effective strategy. You'd never have to watch another video. Of course, you could always press pause, but relative to X and X value. But the trick with paradox is you want to simultaneously be able to say, this is the most amazing, challenging, wonderful talk I've ever heard, at the same time. Relative to what? Well, using these metrics, relative to this, and it's just boring and useless relative to these values and using these metrics. Now, if you then understand that every person uses different metrics in a different value hierarchy, you start to understand the human condition. Now, this then brings up a world of relativism where nothing is right, not necessarily. Because ease and dis-ease do have a principle of symmetry, meaning the more asymmetrical a system is, an ecology is, the more difficult it is. For example, in the United States, where masculine energy is valued 4 times more than feminine energy, or let's say 3 times. So we have, a 75% emphasis on developing masculine skills in a masculine way and developing masculine traits for masculine reasons. And then we have 25% of our emphasis on feminine traits. And we don't even know the difference, because the difference, why would we bother measuring the difference of something so unimportant as feminine energy? But it's in a polarity. And if we give some credence to the fact that the human psyche does evolve with time, and we realize that the United States has only been around for 400 years, and that, much like building a house, there is a very masculine hammering nails and stuff, but once the house is built, it switches to the exact opposite. Once the house is built, the presence and felt sense of space, the emotions induced by the space, the psychological state induced by the shape, the colors, and the space of the architecture that is constructed becomes the natural focus. In other words, there is, in the lineality of time, duality and polarity is broken down into sequential waves, where first you lean too much to the left, and then you lean too much forward, and then you lean too much to the right, and this is called movement in a dualistic paradigm that includes the lineality of time. But when you are looking at ease and dis-ease, and of course in the study of cycles, and Dewey has written a great book about cycles, the fact that every single thing in the multiverse has a rhythm, be it pork trade prices, pork belly prices in the commodities market, or stock prices on the seasonal waves of the year, that if you study the data and spread it out, you will see there is a 10% higher probability that stock prices go up on a spring or sunny day, or whatever the cycle is. I'm not giving actual examples, but you get the idea that the data suggests that there are many, many cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles, and that many of the cycles we have no consciousness of, because we don't bother to measure them. We don't bother to look. If we were very primitive, we wouldn't have even noticed that the moon, moved the tides. Well, we do notice that amazingly, but we don't notice all kinds of other things. So whatever we don't notice destroys us, because we can't partner with it. Now, there are emotional waves, there are life cycle waves, there are maturing waves, and we must understand them and be conscious of them to partner with them with what? The conscious mind, which is where our seat of power in our Western style of language-originated consciousness. You know, it's very interesting to think that if there isn't a word for it, you don't know what it is. You get that? Between the and table is an infinite number of words in that space that do not exist in the English language because they refer to things that our level of consciousness is not conscious of, because the words that would make us conscious of them do not exist. You see? Paradox. If the words don't exist, we're not conscious of them. If we're not conscious of them, we don't know the words don't exist. It's the unknown unknown. And this is all very serious and, of course, complete lunacy. It's complete lunacy. Just words spinning into words that dovetail with the lunacy of our cult. Enough that this is called sane, maybe even interesting, maybe brilliant, rather than I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Well, within the relativity of human consciousness, within our different frames of reference, there's a little bit of all of that. You know, within this part of us has no idea what this part is. You know, our 2-year-old, give me a break. Our 30-year-old maybe is interested. You know, who's interested in what for what reason? But it's all relative. But a good place to arrive with any of these things is the awareness. For example, this effort to bring attention and legal attention and other attention, etc., to the high facilitator's behavior is the biggest threat to high in high's threat matrix. This effort to bring high's attention to its own shadow is the single most important birth and transformation moment for high in high's history, because this is a challenge that invites, that compels, and that puts a lot of pressure and attention on a series of paradigms, protocols, knowledges, goals, values, and ideals that could, with the willing participation of the team, the facilitator, and the wider public, could see a 500% or greater increase in the value that a given participant receives as a result of interacting with the Human Awareness Institute in any of their forms, facilitator, otherwise. So it is the best thing that has ever happened to high. It is the worst thing that has ever happened to high. Could be the end of high, could be this, that, and the other. It's a force. Well, you can't partner with that force unless you understand it and understand its probability fields. Well, you can't understand and partner with it if you demonize the neutral force that could be the best thing for high or the worst thing for high. Well, when you have a force like 5,000 volts, do you kill yourself with it, or do you power a city with it? What do? Do you fry your cell phone? Do you ground it and hold it? Do you know what to do in a culture that doesn't teach you how to manage energy? Well, what's the statistical likelihood? Well, if you've hung in there, there's a higher statistic, because you're in a 5% margin that would be interested in this kind of thing enough to hang in here. Well, the person who's interested enough to hang in here might just be in the 2% that understands a little bit about energy grounding and stuff like that, and would ground a 5,000 volt thing and charge a battery with it and use it to power something amazing, rather than, hate it. Like if we didn't understand electricity, we would probably be blowing up electrical stations, because we would see them as vile things that kill people, because we would die not understanding the powers that we were working with, and then we would say they were bad and evil and had to be killed. Well, this is the difference between ignorance and mastery, demonization and partnership. You cannot partner with something that you do not understand and have some level of mastery with. You cannot understand something that is unknown unless you begin a partnership. There are principles of evolution and growth, and there are principles of sustained and willful ignorance and suffering. And principles are like lighthouses. You can tell them to get out of the way and grind your ship on the rocks, or you can respect the gift of their signal and bow to their message, adjusting your course in the knowledge that the individual ego is not more fundamental to the psychic architecture of the species than the principles that govern evolution and devolution, that we can partner with or attack depending on whether we want to die or whether we want to evolve in the limited concept of freedom granted to the human ego. One more thing I want to say about paradox. You're moving towards paradox when both statements are true, and they seem to be mutually exclusive, number one. Number two, as part of paradox, they both cannot be true and they can be true. I mean, you can't eliminate the paradox in paradox. So the paradox in paradox is that there are some areas where, looking from this angle, paradox doesn't exist and makes no sense. And looking at another angle, through other variables, paradox does make sense. So there has to be paradox about paradox. And next thing is dimensions are conscious based on the measuring and observing devices that see them. So scent is a dimension, the dimension of smell, is conscious, not because of some abstract thing that it just exists. Infinite dimensions exist, but we do not have infinite measuring and observing devices to be conscious of the infinite dimensions. There's only one reason you smell things, because you have an observing device that measures the frequency called smell. And another way of looking at it is as an energy spectrum. You can say that there is an infinite energy spectrum. And on that infinite energy spectrum, in which 99.999% of all of the infinite energy spectrum is unconscious, because you don't have an observing and measuring device capable of measuring it. So in your world, it doesn't exist. when Louis Pasteur discovered the theory of germs, he did it by correlating data. Surgeons were not washing their hands and they were killing their patients almost as fast as they would have died without the surgery. Louis Pasteur began to say there must be something going on. He began to wash his tools and sterilize things. And he noticed that he wasn't murdering his patients anymore. Of course, he told his colleagues, and in the stupidity, see, you have to wonder why humans are so stupid. Physicians murdering their patients, this has happened on a number of occasions, by the way, it's nothing new. On a number of occasions, physicians murdering their patients. And the evidence is right there. There's a connection. Wash your hands, people don't die as much. Don't wash your hands, people die. All the physicians have to do is give it a try. Why not give it a try? Save a few lives. Isn't that what you're here for? Nah. You have to wonder why these physicians are so committed to murdering their patients that they wouldn't even give it a try. It's just washing a few hands. It's just sterilizing a few instruments. What's the big deal? You see, the big deal is a lot. These physicians are traumatized physicians. The last thing they want to do is go into the helplessness of the unknown. The last thing they want to do is feel like they're in the presence of things they don't understand. That's why they became physicians. Hard, rugged scientists that don't make mistakes, important capitalists that know how things work but apparently don't. And here's Louis Pasteur telling them about an unknown. I don't know how it works. I just know that there's something that you can't see. No, something I can't see? Forget it. We're rationalist scientists around here. We're not going to believe this hodgepodge, right? There's something you can't see. It doesn't mean it's woo-woo. It doesn't mean that this is feminine mumbo-jumbo. You just can't see it. No, couldn't be. Let's just keep murdering our patients. So they did. They murdered thousands upon thousands of patients, which is what we do in this cult when we don't like admitting that we don't know what we don't know. We murder thousands upon thousands. And in this case, in our cult, we murder millions and millions of people to protect ourselves from the uncertainty, the chaos of what we don't know that we don't know. Now the microscope came along and showed the ignorant scientist, a new observing and measuring device showed these scientists how to see germs. Well, then they believed him. But they were not going to go there and venture into the realm of faith. They were not going to trust that unknown field because it had never been kind to them. The last time they trusted on faith that their parents wouldn't beat them, they were beaten. Believe it or not, in some metrics, violence is going down, lifespans are increasing, and so we have to look at another very big paradox in our world. Read Abundance, the future is better than you think. Read The Singularity. And imagine a future in the next 30 years that is brighter and more beautiful than you can possibly imagine. Look at some of my videos on 10x world, 10x thinking, etc. Imagine a future and a possibility that's better than you can possibly imagine. Then imagine the exact same future as being more horrific, soul-crunching and soul-murdering than anything you can imagine. And see how they are both there. The horror, the misery, the brutality, the soul murder, and the beauty and the growth and the lifespan and all this. and start distinguishing the different metrics that see different things from different angles and different value hierarchies, and then pass moral judgment on those things for different reasons. And understand that in that paradox, where you can see the most beautiful world dawning imaginable, and the greatest horror of horrors imaginable, and know that we're going into a time of accelerated convergence of these two, the greatest horror and the greatest beauty. And that in some way they must be existent in the circle of the psyche. That we cannot see the greatest beauty without seeing the greatest horror. That we cannot see the greatest horror without being vulnerable to being captured in the resonance of the greatest beauty. If we can do this and hold both, not one, not the other, but both, what it brings is an enormous confluence of presence, a feminine energy, the energy of presence. But let's go back to my little riddle about dimensionality. You're in a two-dimensional world, and you've got a line of traffic going to one another, and another line of traffic going. You're in a two-dimensional world, they cannot both keep moving, right? But you bring in the third dimension. You turn these cars driving on a one-lane road towards one another, and you turn it from a single-deck bridge to a three-dimensional bridge, so there's a lane above. They are stacked on top of one another, and now you've got flow. Whenever the flow of thought and energy grinds to a halt, it can't be this because if it's this, it could be this. It can't be this because it could be this. You bring in another dimension. The dimensions are there. You don't see them. I don't see them. They don't see them. They're there. We don't see them. Why don't we see them? Because we got 5 fucking senses. Every sense sees a narrow band of vibration in a narrow arena. This nose picks up a small spectrum on the smell dimension. That's it. Some it likes, some it doesn't like. It just relates to stuff of this design of this body. The sulfur that is terrible for my body is necessary for some other organism. Smells bad to me, smells like roses to them. You see, it's relative. And so how do we see reality? Oh, we've got this little observing and measuring device. We've got this little one. We've got this little one. We've got this little one. We've got the whole skin. And that's it. That's all. The entire infinite energy spectrum happening around us as we speak. And we get 5 little bits of it if we're paying attention, which we often aren't. And then the brain only processes 50% of what these little 5 devices deal with. So the brain has to sort out it can't process it all. The brain has to figure out which sounds it's going to pay attention to and track and remember, and which ones it's going to forget and tune out. The brain has to look at which sights. Is it this little black dot over here? Is it your eyes? Is it the mouth movement? The brain has to track that. And then the brain has to look at, the sound, the smell, the touch, the temperature is part of touch, all that. The light is part of the eyes, which color is the brain. Oh, there was a red Lexus over there. Why did you see the Lexus? Well, I'm thinking of buying a Lexus, and I notice all the Lexus all of a sudden. Well, did you notice how many Subarus there were? No, I didn't notice that. No, because you're paying attention. Now, if we understand that there are infinite dimensions and we see only 5, we connect with only 5, and then we only connect with a very tiny bandwidth on those dimensions, meaning there are smells on the vibration of smell that our nose cannot pick up because they're above or below the measuring device. It's like the screen. This screen is an observing and measuring device. I go off here, you don't get it. You don't know what these fingers are doing. Am I holding 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3? What? You haven't a clue because they're outside the range. You have no idea what's being smelt 10 octaves above what your nose can smell. No idea. You've got no idea what the ears can hear. No idea. So what the fuck is the intelligent response to all this? I think asking for help. How the fuck can a monkey brain with 5 little doors into the vast spectrum of reality, with infinite paradigms and thoughts and this and the other, possibly figure out what's going on and what to do about it in any kind of an intelligent way? It's profound hubris. We must ask for help. Well, help for whom? For presumably consciousness that has more or different things than we do. The other thing I would say is that we want to move, in the cycle of ease and dis-ease. Dis-ease being asymmetrical. You take a bicycle wheel that's totally symmetrical, you flatten it, the wheel turns up and up and down, up and down. And it's not easy. It's hard. So you look at balance. You look at the balance in a relationship. And you have to look at it from both sides, meaning one person is using their value hierarchy to measure it, you're using their value hierarchy. And so, if one, if one person says that every time you give them $1, it's such a burden because they feel guilty around money and they don't really appreciate it, it just makes them feel more guilty, and you've just given them more guilt and da-da-da-da-da. And every time you give them $1, in fact, I had a client like this. He was a trust fund baby and he wanted to spend all his dad's money. And so I would give him all these ways to save money. And the most intelligent things were often the cheapest ones. But he'd always pick dumb, expensive ways to spend money. So I just flipped it around. I just charged him more money to do the intelligent things. And then he was happy. And I was happy too, because I didn't want to be hired to do dumb things that cost a lot of money. And he'd always ask for options. And he'd do the dumbest thing that cost the most money. So I just flipped it. So he got to waste his father's money without doing dumb things. And I got to make a lot of money not doing intelligent things. And it took me about a year to figure out the pattern. What the fuck is he doing? Why is he always... I work hard. Here's how you save money here. Here's how you save money here. He's like, let's do that one. It's like, that wasn't my point. My point was, this is a better idea and it's cheaper. You like it? No, let's do the dumb idea that's more expensive. So, after a while, I just said, he kept hiring me. It was a good way to spend his dad's money. I just made sure that I manipulated it so that he wasn't getting terribly ripped off, and that he could always pick the most expensive thing that was intelligent. And I didn't want to waste his dad's money, and I didn't want to do dumb things. So that made us both happy. And so, we have these different... we have to ask for help, basically. And now we've got options. Infinite dimensions out there. And we have to correlate and integrate things. Where do you ask for help if you want to make money? Well, I've given a few books in the medicinal page and stuff. Great places. There's tons of great mentors. Every human being, ultimately, if they reach their full potential, wants to serve. That's just human nature, which is why we owe it to ourselves as a species to get all of us through the stages of survival and security and belonging and loving to a point where they can start becoming who they are and transcending and being of service. That's our nature as beings in a hierarchy of needs identified beautifully by Abraham Maslow. And the only big interrupter in this process is trauma. When people have unresolved trauma and are reduced to sociopathic levels, they do not climb Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If they get more power, they become more sociopathic, not more service-oriented, which is why the most dumb thing you can possibly do is deeply traumatize people who are in control of your life, and then punish them some more and traumatize them some more. They will never reach the point of wanting to serve. They will be in a fight, flight, freeze paralysis, and they have absolutely no hope of reaching their humanity in that. And you will probably be their biggest enemy, which is one of the big jokes with the high facilitators, is the most traumatized, terrified parts of me can think of absolutely nothing but how to make sure they don't do this to anyone else at all costs, and this and that and the other. It's how do you turn your biggest fan into your biggest enemy? It's like, well, I guess you sexually abuse them, traumatize them, lie to them, betray them, don't help them integrate their session, make sure they take 3 times more drugs than they want to take, blame them for this, lie to them about this, and then run off. Oh, that's how you do it. Okay, well, good to know. Anyone want to try that one on their next client? Well, be my guest. See where it goes. So this is an exploration of paradox. Anytime, if it's this, it can't be this. If it's this, it can't be this. Just means there's a dimension in play, because while it may not be terribly useful in a tension around, that's $4.99. No, it isn't, that kind of thing. It is useful when looking at things like, in most of this terrain, I have help from my dreams coming in this way. I have help from my crystals coming in this way. I have help from Stephen Covey or John Bradshaw or Brené Brown or whoever it is that I'm studying in that day coming in this way. I've got my own felt body experience coming in this way. I've got the different ages in me saying divergent things. The 2-year-old wants this, the 5-year-old wants this, the 8-year-old wants this, the 20-year-old wants this, the 40-year-old wants this. They want sometimes the same thing for very different reasons. The 2-year-old wants to get revenge and get away from this and do this, and the 5-year-old wants to have a tantrum. But they all want the same thing, but just for a different reason. The 40-year-old wants to teach other people about trauma. Well, they all agree that something like this needs to occur. So then this occurs because there's a consensus within the psyche for different reasons that this has to be brought out. But they want it for different levels and different reasons and things like that. So this is a good way to work with paradox, and this is of course only if you want to broaden your mind and understand yourself and other people. Do these exercises, read the third alternative, get to a point where you can, regardless of what anyone says authentically, meaning when they feel that way, this is evil, this is bad, blah, 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 blah. You're a bad person, this is evil, this is bad, blah, blah, blah. And you can say, well, using this value and this measuring device, that's absolutely correct. And using this value and this measuring device, it's absolutely false. Now, what's the overall imbalance? If we want to go from dis-ease to ease, What's the overall imbalance? For example, there's been too much where I'm paying money, emotionally accommodating the high facilitators, mentally accommodating the high facilitators, financially, physically accommodating so that they can do what they want to do in the way they want to do it at my expense and at the expense of their organization and at the expense of every single person except their own, so that they don't have to go into the trauma and that terrified place of saying, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, I don't know where to go for help, and I've just got to do this way because it's always the way I've been doing it. Okay, so they've got their certainties and need for this. So where can they go for help? Is there a place? Are you going to help them? I asked the facilitators to help Peter Sandhill. Instead, they terrified him. And so he called me in terror, the person who's already in terror, and he said, they're going to take my job. Please help me, help me. And I got on the phone. I made a mistake because I didn't hold the paradox in intention. I just said, look, guys, I didn't ask you to fire Peter Sandhill. I think he's learning something. It turns out he was not learning to put his client first, but I thought he was going to. And I said, if you thought he was a good enough high facilitator the last 12 years, I think he'll probably be a better one the next 12 years if he continues to integrate and learn this stuff. I mean, that's just common sense. This is a very expensive training lesson. He's endangered someone's life and all that, but you could all learn from this. I'm not asking you to fire Peter Sandhill. Goodbye. Well, that got Peter his job, and he promptly abandoned me. It's like the myopia of it's all about me ends up hurting him. Like, who did he hurt by abandoning me? Well, of course, they thought they could just disengage the emails and all that, but hooray, the information age. You cannot kill a story as easy as the kings could of old. Do you like that? Do you not like it? What's the benefit? What's the downside? Paradox, 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 paradox. So thank you for joining me in this paradox. And to deeply join, I invite you to look at in detail, meaning it takes hours and hours and hours, which you have all the time in the world for, and of course you have absolutely no time. The paradox. If you're going to do all the crap our culture tells you have to do, well, you got no time at all. On the other hand, who says you have to do all that? You do, they do. Can you get out of it? I'm not much for just abandoning, responsibilities and all that, but I do know I'm spending 6 months of the year volunteering, starting my nonprofit and all that, to do more because I cared enough to learn about our cult and its business rules and all that to actually be able to make enough money to not need to keep making money, and there's paradoxes there. If you really don't want to deal with money, learn how to make a lot of it. You don't have to, it's like if you want to be a slave to money every single day, then absolutely ignore it. And where you turn, people say, where's your money, where's your money, where's your money? And you say, I don't have it, don't have it, don't have it. You can be confined by money. I earned money because I wanted to love my sweetheart. And lo and behold, I'm in the relationship I thought might happen, where if it wasn't for my money, the relationship couldn't exist. But it's a really good relationship, and I don't want to be a slave to money. So, paradoxes. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you on another video.